I just wanted to start off just a very quick recap of where we, or the origins of this. So I gave a quick 10-minute or 15-minute talk together with, or in collaboration with Doug at the conference earlier this year, talking about what we've been doing to make the data in Bionet open, and how that information might be used as an education resource. So I kind of went through what data is available via Bionet. So that includes species sightings, but a whole lot of other information on top of that. Information around the different types of vegetation in New South Wales, around threatened species and communities, some pretty heavy plot-based survey data and vegetation maps, and talked about how we were making this open and how that potentially could align to things like the geography syllabus, looking at how you collect, analyse and present data, and what we'd done to make it easier to collect data in terms of making it open, trying to standardise it and produce documents. On the analyse front, trying to link our data together, and that's where I think some of the greatest value can come from. And around trying to support from complex through to simple ways of visualising data, not always with GIS tools, and we'll come back to that in a minute. I think I alluded to the fact that making those links is really important, and started to look at the potential. So a lot of this is focused on how we could collaborate together to create resources, and starting to link, as we've done, the data together so that we can start to ask questions of this resource. And then we got down to the point of, I very quickly ran through an example using Excel as one tool. I use that tool because our web service, it can connect natively to our web services, but it's not exclusive. And so I think the objective today was to try and run through with a bit more time an example. And so I've picked just one example, and I'm going to run through that simply to try and get the, I guess, creative juices running, hopefully, so we could start to understand how it might be applied. So I've picked one example, and in this particular example, I'm trying to pretend, and I'm not going to pretend I'm particularly great, that I'm a secondary school teacher, and looking at the data that's in there to answer some questions. So what we're going to try and do today is look at the New England's tablelands biogeographic region, and ask a few questions about the animals in the region. And in specific, we're going to drill down and say, where do threatened species occur, and are there any hotspots? So that's the objective today. So if you're following along, I'm just going to start with a blank worksheet. And so the idea here might be that we could start to, so I'm looking over here because I've got pictures of you all here as well, is to try and incorporate not just the ecology side, but also some of the ICT syllabus. So how do we manage and work with data on top of answering novel questions? So some of you may have the Power Query plugin. If you do, you go up to your Power Query, and we click on Power Query, and over on the right side we say we want to get data from another source. So I click on this other source, and our web services use this standard feed called, or standard called OData. So we click on the OData, and from the OData, now this is the crash and burn moment. I am going to use our brand new in-test third version because it has more data in it. So we'll see how this goes. So we basically put in a URL. So it's data test.bionet.newsouthwales.gov.au / double check it, by the way, Yeah, hold on for a minute. So I'm pretty sure I've got those around the wrong way. Bio SVC app, so the bioservice app, OData. Yep, so this is going to take us in, hopefully, when I click OK, and show us all of those different data sets that we've now made openly available. Yep, so I can do this from home. I do this from home quite often in mini water, so anyone can now access this data. And so we saw before those different collections that we hold. So we've got the species sightings, we have the vegetation classification, we have information on New South Wales landscapes, Mitchell landscapes, and in release 3 we're adding all of this information around, here it's called threatened entities, but we'll rename that to be threatened biodiversity because entities isn't very intuitive, and species taxonomy. Yep. So another little one in here, thesaurus, but that's aimed at app developers. So what I'm going to do today is take a look at the species sightings. So I will select the species sightings core data. So this is the records of observations throughout New South Wales. There's about 9 million publicly available observations in here, and they've been collected and collated from a range of sources. So I select that and I click on edit, and instantly it comes up and says, oh, here's all of the different data that you can use. Now, hopefully for a lot of people, this might feel quite familiar. It uses the same kind of way of interacting as a standard sort of Excel spreadsheet that hopefully people are reasonably familiar with. And so the first thing that I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say, well, and this is where we might sit down and say, if we're going to ask a question around threatened species in the New England tablelands, what information might we need? So the first thing out of all of the information that's there, we'd choose just the information that we want to get. So we'd click on this choose columns. And out of this, I'd say, well, I don't want everything. What am I really interested in? So we said we were going to search for the New England tablelands, so I need to know the bioregion. I'm interested in threatened species, so I would want to know down here the state conservation. I might also be interested in the country conservation, so it's listed at a federal level as well as the state level. I might want to know when the observation was made, the event date. We're doing this as part of a GIS syllabus, so I definitely need to know its latitude and longitude. I might be curious a bit later to drill down a bit and ask some questions like, well, if there are any hotspots, do different types of threatened animals, so birds, reptiles, or frogs, do they occur evenly across this bioregion, or are they in specific areas? So we might want to select then class. I'll need to select kingdom because I'm only interested in animals, and I want to know what's there, so I'm going to choose the scientific name and the vernacular name. So click on OK here, and the first thing we're probably learning about here, hopefully, is around filtering down and focusing in on the data that's important for the question that we're asking. Now, we see down here the applied steps that we've put, so maybe this could be built, or something similar like this could be built around that notion of how do I extract data. So the next thing we want to do is say, well, I want to filter based on just the area that I'm looking at. So we're interested in the New England tablelands in New South Wales. So I'll click on that. And now it starts to build my filter down. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm only interested in looking at animals, so I'm only going to select animals. And the other thing I want to do is I want to put this on a grid. So I'm going to try and aggregate these to present a sort of a gridded pattern. So what I'm going to do is, for my decimal latitude and longitude, I'm going to transform the data. And here I'm going to round the data to 2 decimal places, because that's around our latitude plus or minus a kilometre grid. So hopefully here there's, from an ICT perspective, some chance to show about how we work and massage with data. The other thing that I might try and do is, I see that the dates here are given 2 different dates. I've had a look back in my standard, and I know that this is the first date it was observed and the last date. I might want to split that. So I split the column by a delimiter. I say that it's a custom delimiter, and I click OK, and it will now break that column up, hopefully, into the date first and the date last. Yeah. No, it didn't. Or did it? Yeah, this is called the epic fail. Should work. Oh, hang on. Let's kill that. Kill that. Yeah, split column by delimiter. Worked earlier on. Custom slash. I think this is going to work now.
I'll edit that out of the recording, James, so it seems.
Yeah, well, that's all right. So now we've got our 2 dates. I'm going to rename this rename this. So come down here, and I'm going to call this date first. And I'm going to call this one here, rename it to call it date last. Yeah. So we've just been through a quite a complex process to create this query that's now going to go back to the web service and pick just the data we want, filter it by the criteria that we've given, and transform it according to the rules that we've created. So, you know, if you were trying to look at it, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the background that makes that happen. We didn't have to write any code. We just dragged and dropped it. So hopefully it makes it a bit simpler for people to start to understand, well, there's a lot of data out there, but to start to answer the question that I need to answer, I need to start filtering and aggregating it. So I now go away and I say, all right, close and load. So what actually happens now in the background is, now that I've built that query, it's actually in real time going away, and it's going to collect and pull back all the records from Bionet that meet those criteria. It's going to trim out the latitude and longitude and split up the date and rename it. Now, it returns 100,000 rows of data at any one time. So we can see over here on the right-hand side, it says what it's doing, and it's waiting. And in the background, hopefully, it will be pulling down the data. And if it fails, because it's a test service, no, here we go, got 32,000. So it takes a wee while until it executes and generates the 100. It'll wait again. It's going to say if it fails, I have prepared one earlier. Yep. So in real time, it's going away and getting this data. The nice learning element from this too could be, we build this once, and then every time we want to ask the question again, rather than having to rebuild the query, we'd just click on the refresh button to go and get the latest information. Yeah, I'm not very good at being a teacher, so you probably talk about the ICT links a lot better in a geology high school setting. I'm not sure how we'd apply that in the Environmental Education Centre setting. So that's how we create a query, and we see that now I've returned 156,000 rows of data for this area. Should I keep going, or do you want to pause for questions? All right, so at this point then, I've got the information that I want, and now I want to start visualizing this data. So there's a couple of things I could do. I could save this, and I did actually save this when I was at the conference. I did a slightly different query when I was at the conference for emu in New South Wales, and I actually imported it into my maps on or my Google Maps here, and I just plotted the distribution of the coastal emu versus the other emu. So I told it just to grab the population name. So I can see that even though there's a lot of emu sightings in New South Wales, that actually this threatened populations are very restricted in where they occur. So the data can be quite easily pulled through into Google Maps or a whole lot of other places. But I'm just going to stay back here and create a map using using the map feature that's now in Excel. So I click on this and I say launch Power Map. So I'm trying to identify in here, are there any hotspots of biodiversity in this region? So it'll come up. We see that it's plotted now all of those sightings on a map. We see here on the right hand side that it's found that there's something called decimal latitude and decimal longitude that it's mapped, and so we click on next. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk in this first instance about threatened species. So it's got a layer up here, so let's rename layer 1 to be a threatened species layer. Yeah. We wanted to do a heat map, so I'm going to change the visualization away from a column to a heat map, and it looks like it's pretty hot with species in there. Bit more I need to do. So the first thing I want to do is change the value, as I'm looking at this from a species point of view, and just add the scientific name in there, and not all of them, because I'm not interested in trying to see a count of all observations. I'm trying to make this about species richness. Where do they occur? So let's just look at distinct species names. So we change that to distinct. There's still a lot in here. This isn't adding much to me, so I might just remove that. And what I need to do now is it's grabbed all of the data. And when we got that data, I included not just those that were threatened. So I'll go here to filters. I'll add a filter, and I'll say that I want to filter based on my state conservation. So I can add that and select all and say, actually, the only ones I'm not really interested in is only threatened. So anything that's not listed, let's remove that. Yeah. So now when I start to come into my area, let's add some map labels so we can start to relate to it. Pivot it down a little bit. Now we can start to see that there are specific areas where we've had sightings of threatened species. So are there any hotspots? Well, if I kind of zoom in and have a look around, it does indeed seem to be that, you know, they're not evenly distributed across this region. So there are definitely some hotspots. Do they tell us anything? And maybe these are questions you could be structuring as part of the coursework. So we're saying, are there anything we can deduce from here? And you know, the first thing is I see there's some hotspots down here where I can see these national parks. And if I scroll around and have a look at my data, I see that there's a whole lot over here, which when I zoom in, it starts to grid down properly. I can see that they're not associated with national parks. So maybe there's a question there in terms of the role of private land in providing valuable habitat for threatened species. We said before we wanted to know, do threatened species, the different types of animals, occur the same distribution or evenly spread across the region? So we can add another filter in here. And this time we'll add the class, and now I can start to have a look and say, well, where do the threatened birds occur? Oh, yeah, they're reasonably well across the region. What about if I have a look at reptiles? All of a sudden I can see here, oh, there's only 2 areas. What might I be able to deduce from this? That they're limited in their range of where they occur. Perhaps it might be the same for amphibia, for the frogs. What might I be able to deduce from this in terms of maybe rainfall patterns? So we can start sort of filtering and having a look at these different hotspots and potentially ask some questions. Now, if we're a senior class, we might be thinking these are people who might grow up to become advocates for the environment. So if we were thinking that we might have to present this to the Minister of the Environment or to someone else, could we argue for any decisions to be made based on this map? Can we have confidence? Do we know if it's comprehensive? Have we missed anything? So how do I kind of start to look at or learn about the limits of data? So maybe one of the ways we could explore this is by adding a new layer, because we did get all of the species sightings that we've had for the region. So we're going to add another layer, and in this layer we're going to look at, we'll rename this layer to call it all sightings. Yep. So we're not going to look just at the threatened species, we're going to look at all of them. And what we might want to do is look across at this and say, how many sightings have we had overall? So this could be, for instance, an indication of survey effort. So I'm going to take my scientific name and drag it into height, so that I can show the height of the bar, and I'll leave it as count. The height of the bar is going to show me how many sightings there are for any particular area. So I might just go over here to my settings to make it a bit easier, and I'll make the thickness down to 40% or thereabouts, and make this a little bit smaller. And maybe we can start to zoom in to my area here, and we'll pivot it down to get a better 3D view over what's going on. We'll zoom in a little bit more, and it becomes quite clear that the sightings are very clumped together. So maybe the reflection of threatened species hotspots is an artifact of the amount of survey effort. We can see that they're all clumped here. The other thing we can start to see now that we've put this other information in is all of these gaps. And so if this is our total area, we can see that there's been very little on a 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre grid survey effort done in a lot of these other spaces and private land, and actually even within some of the national parks. So this is the kind of thing that might be used, for instance, for us to start to drive and talk with the class about where we might go out to fill some of these data gaps. There's a nice link in here through to citizen science, looking at understanding where different species may or may not occur. So, you know, based on this, maybe we could work through whether we would or wouldn't use just this simple heat map to go and try and persuade people to, you know, put a new national park over here where there's lots of threatened species. It starts to hopefully show us how we might understand the limits of information. So that was my very basic concept of how the data could be used, showing hopefully quite a simple and I think easy way to plot the data without having to get into some quite complex GIS software that people might easily be able to relate to. So happy to do more on the Q&A now, or roll back and take it more slowly at particular areas. Let me know what you'd like to take a look at.
Thanks, James. That's look. I think the tools that you've shown us in Excel, 2016, certainly. I mean, I wasn't aware until I sat down in your presentation at the EZEC conference, of that map function, and having enabled that, I think there's a lot of schools that might have balked at, standard sort of GIS software that might readily be able to use that. So any comments from other people in the audience here? Jill, any thoughts?
I'm overwhelmed by the sort of power of this, but I don't know, I think I'm experiencing what people might feel when I try to explain Google Maps to them, and they don't have an understanding because I feel pretty overwhelmed by it. Yeah,
sorry, it's quite a lot to take in all at once. I guess what would oh.
I'm just wondering about this Power Query.
Yeah.
You said was a plugin, so is that available to all of us now on Excel? Yes.
So I sent an email through to Doug. Yeah. So it's a free download that you can download and use with Excel.
Okay.
Yeah. This is only an example. I guess we certainly don't advocate for this as the thing to use. It's just that we know it works, and so out of this, I was kind of hoping that by me doing a mock pretend of a Q&A way of leading through a line of thought, that might inspire some thoughts of how we could take this further and actually start to develop some resources that would be useful. And as Jill said, I can certainly appreciate that straight off the bat, trying to do something like this in a classroom would probably be difficult, particularly in your settings. But if we can think about, what might be some questions that are relevant, or curriculum questions that you're trying to answer, having seen what could be achieved, then I could potentially work with you to try and put together some resources. So the idea was to inspire and hopefully start to show you how to use some of these tools.
Well, I'm thinking, how close can you drill down to an area? Say, for example, I mean, today, my biology work that I've just done, we're in an area 80 metres long, so in a national park. So it would be interesting to know what threatened species are in the fieldwork sites that we're using.
Yeah. So you can pull out the records as held. And so they would then, I gridded them so that we could get some kind of idea of where they were and weren't present. And so normally what we might do is, rather than going down onto the individual plots, is we might say, well, before we go in the field, why don't we do a query, and maybe we'll pick a bigger area, let's say 10 kilometres around the area we're going to survey, and let's get an idea if there are any threatened species present in this vicinity, particularly animals, given that they're mobile, that we should keep an eye out for. So you might use it in that case to generate a kind of a species list and show people where they've been seen before.
Yeah.
You could try to go down to that 80 by 80 metre plot, but it would depend on what data is there. So the data is very patchy across the state.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd probably find at that level you'd be lucky. Sometimes you get a hit and you get quite a bit. More often than not, you don't. But again, that I think serves as a good illustration to people in the centres to say, there's just so much we don't know. And again, this links back into the citizen science initiatives, saying how do we collect more information to build that knowledge. In actual fact, the work you're doing in the classroom today can help contribute to our knowledge.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I can see that if, for instance, if we were doing a BioBlitz somewhere, we could do a before and after, and see that would show something, and it might encourage us to go back and to keep repeating it to see how things have changed. So for me, it's brilliant visualization of what's there. I think it's wonderful, but a bit like Jill, the facilitation of how to simplify it enough so people are inspired without being terrified of it is a very important first step, I think.
I think on that point, Libby, that all of us, those initial steps that James was going through, having a recording and being able to go back into that is pretty important. And materials, I mean, my thoughts about preparing something which is, specifically on the Bournda site would be, if I'm using it with students to do a jing or, a screen capture exercise where they, are guided through, like James has done there, they go guided through a simple exercise to start off with, and then, something a little bit more complex, and then giving them a task to do which replicates those processes. I think, the syllabus for biology, and I sort of just went through it and pulled out a whole lot of things. These secondary sourced investigations are all through that syllabus, and with students doing, their depth studies, there's a really good opportunity there to create a resource that's centred around an environmental education centre and get students and teachers to play with that, and that kind of leads them towards us, which is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. I think the richer it gets, the more interesting it gets, and that's what you're saying, James, isn't it? That if you can encourage students or citizens to build up really rich data sets, then you can do all kinds of things with it.
Yes, I think.
As I say, I agree. I spent staff development day with about 100 science teachers, and they're going to really need data and be able to direct their students to data. So this is brilliant. One thing just in looking at it that I would love, James, is all of those identifiers that you had for picking the columns, just a cheat sheet of what they are and what they mean.
Yeah. So if we were doing this, then we can data dot. So if we go to data.bionet, and we could simplify it down for a classroom setting, but there's this data standard. So if I go in here and open the data standard, it tells me, and obviously see it's not very friendly.
I know who wrote that.
It tells me what each of these means. So geographic stem, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean? So we could certainly reformat that into a resource that's a bit easier. And
a cheat sheet of the most relevant, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
So the resource is there, and we could filter that down pretty easy.
Is the data that you're using here linked to the National Biodiversity Database, or is it a separate thing?
No, so all of this data is fed back up through to the ALA.
Right.
Yeah. So they actually, funnily enough, they use exactly the same web service that we're pulling this data out. So it's a very consistent way to ensure that we're both looking at the same data.
I think that's a very important thing. But can you mention when you were talking about weather? I know a bit about the ALA layering of different information. Can you then layer this information with other sources of information to see if there are any correlations?
You could, and I think that you'd have to ask yourself, maybe it's most appropriate to do that using the ALA online resource. If you were somewhere that had low network capability, then you can, there's an ability here to import custom regions. It's not the sort of thing you'd do with students. No. You'd have to preset the whole thing up so that they just had to click to expose or not expose it. Yeah, it gets more complex. I tried to keep it as simple as possible.
So this information is just information about species and obviously the conservation status and things like that.
Well, what we used here is in this particular case, we just used information on species sightings because I wanted to know what occurred around me. If I wanted to have information on threatened species, like what are their threats separately, then there's another data set we could query to get into more detail on the threats a specific species face.
Yep.
And if there was a desire to create a more unified way of exploring this, like I showed that linked data, then I think collaborating with an app developer, education resource app developers. So me working with the core group out of here to understand how, what data there is and how it would support the learning objectives that you have, and then us working together with someone who produces like iOS apps for use in as education resources would be much better. This particular tool I showed you has its limitations. It's most easily used for simple data presentation. There are other tools that would be better for combining data.
I think simple is good. I think we'll stick with simple. Look, James, when you first went into the Excel spreadsheet, just a quick question, because I was trying to follow you, and I did have a spreadsheet open, and that's probably where I sort of got lost.
That's right.
I went to new query.
Yeah.
And it was even across the top, it had options of from web. Was it from web that we went to?
No, it was from other sources.
From other sources, and
see on the screen.
And then
click on that.
Web? Yep.
From the OData feed.
Okay, because it's interesting. Are you using 2016 there, or?
No, I'm only using. Are you on 2016? Are you?
Yeah. So,
okay, so you've got to go to. You can share your screen, and I can help you walk you through it. But yeah, they've slightly reformed it. It's in a little part called I think it's called Get and Transform.
Right. Yeah. No, I found that actually. Interestingly, the laptop that I've got that I'm using here, it's got 2013 on it. So
okay.
It was just when I went in and pasted that datatest.bionet.newsouthwales.gov.au into it, in 2016, it talked to it, but it didn't do. Oh no, it's working now. There you go. Look at that. I was a bit frustrated there because I couldn't. I was trying to follow you along, but it didn't bring up the navigator screen.
Okay.
And so the next step. Sorry for those people that are listening in, and I will put the recording out to you shortly. You can go over this. So the next step was to select the core data. Correct?
Yeah. So that's what we said, but don't load it. So yeah, mine's going to take a while to connect. So you would highlight the core data. If you clicked load, it will genuinely try and do this. It'll try to load all 9 million records into Excel.
Yeah.
And once you hit the 1 million, Excel kind of freaks out a little bit. So you've got to make sure you click on that edit button. Yeah.
Okay.
And that brings up then that new screen. Where you start to build your query.
Okay. And what was the first thing that you selected in that screen?
Well, normally what I do is I always think because there's 96 odd fields of data here that you could pick from.
Yeah.
And so on that home ribbon, I always go to under manage columns. I always choose my columns first. So that the first question I always ask myself is, what question am I trying to answer?
Yep.
And then what are the relevant data fields that will enable me to answer that?
Sure. Okay. No, that's good. I've been able to follow that quite easily. I just got a stumbling block there at the beginning. So, can you turn off all the columns? Oh yeah, you've got to select all columns. And look, that's good.
Unselect all.
It would be really useful to have a list of examples of questions that this can do really well, that this can answer really well. I think that would be a really handy thing to have, to know what questions you can ask it.
I guess most of them would be around kind of distribution of species. So for the species sightings, the ones would be, what's been seen around me? When was it seen? Where was it seen? So those types of questions. And then a lot of the fields enable you to filter it by specific kind of sub areas, be that, by a national park, by a local government area, by a geographic region. Yeah.
I guess as a help for even myself, let alone students, would be something like Libby's mentioned with sample questions, but then if you want to answer a question like this, I suggest you use these columns.
Yeah. Well, this is where it would be good to hear from you guys to say, well, what are some common questions? Try, and this is the collaboration part. I was hoping to show the potential of what it could do, and then maybe after this, if we go away and we think, okay, what's here? So these are sightings of species. So we know we're going to have a lot of information about, what it is, where it was seen, the time it was seen. What would be some ways that you might use that in the classroom? And then if you come back to me with those, and I can say, right, well, if I was going to be answering that question, this is how I'd do it. Or, whoa, it's a complex question, give up. At least in this tool.
Yep.
One should recognise the limits.
I know that the SOS guys are working through a sort of, they've developed a priority of species most endangered and most that need the most support, and that's partly how they're going to develop their work process for the next 5 years or whatever it is. And that's quite an interesting thing in terms of kids, I would think, to see which are the most endangered, and then you can drill down and do things around, what are the causal factors for that. What sort of vegetation is there, and what sort of developments have happened there, and all the rest of it.
Yep. So that's where some of the, I think, to try and do that kind of Q&A, we'd use another free tool you can download called PowerBI, which is also a Microsoft one, and there you can link data in there to answer those kind of questions. So we've done some tests where we've linked data from on the threatened species profile with information we hold around the vegetation community to be able to say, here's the threatened species, where have we seen it? So pull up all of these records for that species in an area and plot them in a map, and then also say, well, what's it's associated with? So that would be quite a specific case that you'd build quite a specific data visualization tool for the students and pre-package it for them.
I suppose the question is whether you're trying to teach them the skill of using the software, or whether you're trying to get them to answer questions and learn it at the same time. Because there's a kind of a different approach, isn't it? If you're depending on what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'll leave that to the teachers. The thing we were certainly looking at was how do we make the data available using some tools that we have a sort of a small chance, at least, that people might be passingly familiar with, versus specific GIS apps like ArcMap that are incredibly powerful but quite niche, and so the way that you interact with them is not very familiar.
Yes.
Okay.
My hope is... Go, Doug.
I was just going to say, we're coming up to the hour, and we've got, there's a few people here that we didn't say hello to. We've got Amy, I think, is a colleague of Kim Rendell's. Is that correct?
Unmute. Yes. Is this working?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yes, that's correct.
Right, okay. And we've also got Ian, who is a colleague of yours, James. Is that correct?
Yep, as is Amy. We're all in the same kind of area.
Okay, very good. And there was someone there from New South Wales A squared E squared. I wasn't sure who.
It's me, Doug. It's Christine.
Yeah.
Oh, Christine. Hello.
That's and a boy just came home from school.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Hey.
Okay. Well.
Yeah. So I've been logged in from another video conference, so that's why it came up under that.
Sure. Oh, that's all right. No, I was just curious.
Sorry, I thought it was at 3:30. So
that's fine. We've recorded everything, and you'll be able to look at it again in slow motion if you like. I'll certainly be looking at some of those things in slow motion so I can get it correct. Look, I'm thinking at this stage that for our next webinar, what I'd like to do is, obviously in my own time, go through all those steps that James has done there and create for my area down here some sort of simple map. Is that do I have to get a different data set, James, or can I do it from what you've shown us?
You can use the same, it's all the same thing, you just filter it differently. So I can help support you through that, or anyone else who wants to give it a go.
All right. So I just thought for the next video, the next seminar or the next webinar or whatever you're calling it, if some of us can have a go at creating a simple map based on data around our Environmental Education Centre or relevant to a program that we're using with the school, that might be a good, show and tell session that we can bring to another webinar and get brownie points from James for being able to do things correctly. So that's where I certainly want to go with it. Any other ideas for the next webinar?
Sounds good.
And just to recap for those Department of Education people here, I have submitted a non-registered course to MyPL at EDU for this as a course called Spatial Technologies with 4 webinars with James. I took liberties there. I didn't consult with him about whether he was prepared to do 4, but he's been very helpful so far. And I thought if that's between now and the end of the year, that's probably a realistic time frame. And I know James is very busy and has lots of demands on him as well. So I'll consult with you about the date of the next one, and we'll see obviously when James is available and when we're all available. But I'll do a bit of work to distribute the video to everyone, and perhaps we can just do a bit of brainstorming and think about some questions that would relate to the geography syllabus. I sent James extracts from the stage 6 syllabus because I thought that was a good place to start for some of the things we do here. But I certainly think if we look at the geography, stage 5 outcomes, there's a logical place to do quite a few things there, and probably in stage 4 as well. So
maybe the other thing as we progress through, so I think it's fair to say that this kind of approach is about asking of novel questions and going and getting the data yourself. I know that there are also resources that the organisation has kind of pre-packaged and done the work on. So maybe at one of the later sessions, it would also be good to get Kim's team engaged in this and start to look also as we sort of, I guess, move up the stack as to say, what are some of the other resources that we have where we've, it's already pre-focused on answering some specific questions. So that might be something to consider as we get a bit further down.
Yeah, that's a great point, James. And look, Kim she did ask if Dan and Nichols from Kosciuszko could come along, and obviously there's some that application of the GIS stuff, which is, as you say, been pre-packaged with the pygmy possum data, is a nice one to look at. And so I might ask him if we can just get a bit of a run through on how Dan and some of the people and some of the teachers are using it. That would be good to build into the next session as well.
Cool. And I know that Amy's also been working on some initiatives that would also be relevant that we could build in as well. Yeah, so just want to make sure it's not just about the data we have. It's a building blocks. This is the how do I explore at the most basic level to answer novel questions.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, look, any other questions from anyone? Anyone want to make any comments?
Just very glad to be here and to listen to it. It's the first step, I think, in terms of grappling with it. It's great. Thank you very much, James.
Well, thanks to Doug. Doug, this came out of his reach out, so yeah.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Doug.
Have to go now. Thank you very much.
All right,
cheers.
thank you all for attending, and I'll get a video to you at some stage.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Check it out. Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, James. That was good. And I think we've got a starting point there, and Zoom seemed to work okay. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's great. Love it.
Everything was clear, and I could see exactly what you were doing. So I'll consider that a worthwhile expenditure on moving up into the pro version. We didn't get cut off at a critical time there, so that was good to know.
You should ask them for give you a little bit of help. You've been a good salesperson. Where I've already shared it with my team. It's a good service.
Yeah, well, I'll give that credit to A squared E squared, because that's how I got onto it. So I guess that's how good ideas get around. If it's working with one group, work with others. So, all right, well, I'll sign off then, and I'll speak to you soon, and I'll just do a bit of a summary and flick that round. But I might just have a quick go at doing a map myself while I'm...
All right, and if you get stuck, remember we can always use this so I can see what you're doing and help you.
Yeah, good on you. All right.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
See you later. Bye.